Welcome to a panel that I'm very excited about, and I know that the rest of DSVP and our city is excited about as well. Another part of bigBANG, now over a decade of bringing folks together to discuss big ideas, and as one of our panelists shared earlier today, be a part of the impact party. And who we have today is StatZero, a Silicon Valley-based impact fund that invests in bold entrepreneurs and emerging technologies that move the world towards zero. Zero is something they're going to tell us about today. But ultimately, working to unite governments, impact investors, and entrepreneurs to solve global challenges. Sounds like no small task. And particularly when we talk about impact investing, a lot of times people push back on scale. And I have a feeling that our panelists today have some answers for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jessica Salinas, Johanna Harrington, and Marquise Cabrera from StatZero. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited.
So
go ahead, Sean.
First, just starting off, if each one of you could just quickly introduce yourself and your role, and then one of you tell us just a little bit about StatZero before we dive into some of our media questions.
Absolutely. I'm Johanna Harrington. I'm co-founder and transitioning from the president's role into an advisor role at StatZero.
My name is Marquise Cabrera. I'm the co-founder and CEO, and off to Jessica.
And I'm Jessica Salinas, and I am founder as well, and partner and vice president at StatZero. And Charles, I think you said it wonderfully. You captured what StatZero is, but to give you a little bit more detail and background, we are positioned as a public sector consulting group with an impact fund. And with that fund, we invest globally in these digital transformation startup solutions that can really help us move the world towards those 3 zero goals that you mentioned, which is zero poverty, zero disease, and zero pollution. So excited to be here and talk a little bit more about how we hope to do that.
Awesome. Well, I think that leads us towards what you all are trying to do, which is no small task, and it's certainly a bold vision, taking those 3 major indicators to a stat of 0. Why this mechanism? Why StatZero now? And how did you all come together to form what you're now leading?
Marquise, why don't you take that one?
So prior to starting StatZero, all of us were focused on impact, right? I think all of us were at that transition point of how do we leverage our skill set, my learning, GovTech, Jessica's learning, social impact, new media, Johanna's technical skills as being a lawyer and her policy expertise in the health policy space. And we were all trying to look for that engine for change. And so what we then said was, okay, how do we establish a company that could have a continuous innovation structure such that we could help governments, right? And when I was at IBM prior to joining StatZero, we did a survey. And what we saw was that even before the pandemic, less than 40% of families across Europe and North America had less than $4,000 in their bank accounts. So any snafu to the economy, not yet alone a global pandemic, was going to send half of these families reeling, right? And we're seeing even more so of that with the global pandemic. So with the engine we created, we said, we'll set up a R&D group where we can consult governments seeking digital startup solutions. And then we would build the engine to invest in them such that we could leverage the carrot of finance to also sustain that solution for the government at the same time. So for us, it was this, let's come up with a market. The digital transformation market is massive. And all we're really doing is working with channel partners to invest in solutions and venture build solutions that are moving the world towards zero pollution, zero disease, and zero poverty.
Excellent. The interesting, you brought up a stat there, and that's a stat that oftentimes I think we attribute to what you were talking about is the working poor, right? Folks who are one event away from not being able to cover rent, put food on the table. And there's a recent study that came out in our region from the Communities Foundation of Texas in conjunction with Every Texan that highlighted that. So that's certainly no different in our own region in the way that you're looking at it with some of these other larger geographies and governments. Can you discuss the recent social movements and how it's impacted or influenced the impact investing world and the lens that you just described, and not necessarily just for Marquise, but for the entire panel here, and how those markets look for underrepresented founders?
I'm gonna give Jessica that question.
Yeah, I can start that. And I think to begin answering that question, because it's a huge question, right? We have to talk about the impact investing market. And to give a little background, in 2018, the impact investment market was estimated at $220 billion worldwide. And that's according to the Global Impact Investor Network's annual survey. In 2020, this year, it's estimated to be over $700 billion. So that's more than 3 times the growth in the span of 2 years. And I think there are many drivers for that. And one of the drivers obviously has been, the development of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals worldwide, where it's the coming together of all of these nations and saying, we together have to figure out how to achieve these goals like zero poverty or gender equality, et cetera, et cetera. And they have their own indicators for that. And in doing that, they also said that they couldn't do it without the help of the private sector. There was a gap that existed with what the government could do and the private sector, which was a $2.6 trillion gap, if I am remembering correctly. And so that has really pushed the private sector into figuring out what exactly they could do for, good reasons, like we want to make impact, but also for financial reasons, right? If you have governments that are saying, hey, we're willing to put capital behind this, this is a good market, the private sector is going to take a listen. And then the second one is obviously climate change. And the third one is the pandemic, right? The acceleration. So there's an urgency, like Marquise mentioned in his response, there's now all of these people that are unemployed worldwide. It hit everyone at the same time. It was an unexpected situation that really exacerbated a lot of the inequities that already existed. I think that brings me to those social changes, right? Because the inequities that already existed had already impacted certain populations more than others. And in the United States, we can say safely that that's Black, Latinx, and the working poor, so the poor. And the pandemic only exacerbated that. And then we had these social uprisings, right? That happened at the time where people are unemployed. We had 30 million unemployed at the time when George Floyd happened, and then you have this kind of visible event that brings to life another social movement when people are already frustrated, and everyone now is called to action, including, this was a global movement, so including again the private sector, where now employees are saying, hey, what are we doing? We can't just sit around. We have some sort of responsibility to do that. And that has brought the attention of VCs, because again, interesting market, but also this call to like social responsibility. And what we're seeing now is that VCs, entrepreneurs are kind of wanting to solve these issues. And a lot of them are those that are impacted by these solutions, which again happen to be Black, Latinx, women, and or the poor, because they're like, we know the problems, let us help fix them, because you don't know the problems like we know the problems, right? And so those are those underrepresented founders. And so I think I'm cautiously optimistic about where we're headed. It seems like we are heading in a positive direction where VCs, impact investors, this market is growing. And we now have these underrepresented founders that are like, pay attention to us. We know what we're talking about. And we're seeing a lot of positive movement, including, with what we're trying to do, but with also our partners in the sector that are now more interested and more engaged and wanting to actually find solutions to how we can support these populations and these communities.
Yeah, it's some of the things you laid out, I think are, everyone in America is seeing that play out today. But some of the things you laid out, I think are less known. So it's interesting you said that the United Nations resolution and the identification of how much private capital would be needed is one of the drivers of that huge jump. That's something I was frankly unaware of, and that hypothesis that the UN part is driving that. Then you bring in this, to your point, the corporations that are now getting more involved in social justice amidst the unrest, and then ultimately underrepresented founders having a viewpoint and a set of engagement that is different than what traditionally has been done around these spaces. And so that just thank you for laying all of those things out, because I think they're all unique, but they are certainly all important in their combined impact on this space. And so when we now kind of diving a little deeper into the impact investing component and your particular goals as an organization, what do those investments look like for you all right now? And talk a little bit more about the goals themselves that you have for Stat Zero.
I think Johanna should take this one.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, and thanks, Charles, for that that question, and we appreciate it. And I think Stat Zero's impact investment thesis is well developed. You know, Jessica did an excellent job writing it, building out our opportunities to do so, following those UN Sustainable Development Goals that we have. And so looking at that, I think in the long run, really what we're trying to invest in is companies that make an impact digitally, make an impact and have an opportunity to really lead into that space, solve the climate change, solve the disease issues, solve all of those problems going forward. And so really looking at those concepts and opportunities to build out new opportunities. And I'm sorry, am I frozen? Because all of you are frozen.
Nope.
You're not frozen.
I can see.
Okay, sorry. I got distracted because all of your faces froze suddenly, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing you, the joy of Zoom. But what I'm saying is that really in our impact investment, and we're going forward to make these changes looking at the digital work in the disease space. And that's where I focus on is the zero disease and really honing in on that. We've invested in some interesting companies, reaching the cutting edge of training opportunities, reaching the cutting edge of impact of cardiac care. We're looking at an amazing company working in reducing plastics because they're creating plastic sheeting. And so I really think the investments that Stat Zero is doing are the ones that are going to go out and change the world, working with the governments to create this impactful change and solving those grand global challenges. So I'm excited. And I know that Jessica and Marquise are equally excited in all of the various investments we've made and really have an opportunity to take new steps and build new changes and really kind of lead into this large space, tapping into that market that's so important and so opportunistic, I guess, in this world and in the way it's going forward. So I think really
that was awesome, Johanna. Just to tie in, Charles, I think that was awesome. To tie in what you were saying, to get specific, right? When you think about impact investing has been happening since Medicaid has been alive, right? For pay for performance. And so when you look at many models, for example, the Oregon model, it's usually pay for performance. And so when you go back and you think back about how what we're doing is working, we're essentially saying, let's pay for performance. And so, and how do we incentivize investors to get an opportunity to capitalize on that performing opportunity? And that being a public sector digital asset. A lot of family offices globally, right? The sustainability market is $1 trillion. The digital transformation market is set to go from 400 billion to over $1 trillion in the next 5 years. So massive markets that we can capture. But the problem is these governments don't have the digital maturity, right? So we're trying to get the digital maturity for those markets. And then how do we help those governments drive through new capabilities and innovation? What you saw back in the day was the financial corporation pop up during this time period where they became the broker and barter of interest. Canada tried to work on superclusters. People are trying to create new job opportunities. For example, the South African GDP dropped because of lack of R&D and SME growth. So can we present financial and impact investment offerings that are paid for performance, right? That's essentially what we're opening up to our investors. And we're doing that, and we know we need to do it. Most investors today do not understand digital assets. And I'm not just talking cryptos and STOs. I'm talking own a company that white labels in an infrastructure that access to finance portal in South Africa. So how could we leverage that opportunity to open up an investment opportunity to do so? Sweden, for example, is doing this. They're offering 45% in non-dilutive funding as a government to 5 companies to tackle 1 billion of carbon, or excuse me, a gigaton of carbon. And so they're saying, hey, can I actually use that capability and have industry match 55% such that we can then grow that capability, leverage those 5 companies that are Swedish focused companies, and then grow market share worldwide. And what we're trying to do is create those same opportunities for our network of investors.
Would you say the mechanism and, oh, go ahead, Johanna.
I was just saying that's, I think, the beauty of Stat Zero, frankly, is that interest in creating these global scalable solutions across the governments, and really working with the companies that we've invested in, working with these organizations that we are so dedicated to seeing succeed, whether it be small startups that are really hitting their stride, or the larger ones that we've invested in with, to kind of help bring them into this new market and into this new opportunity. And so working with the governments around the world lets us achieve and reach those global challenges that Jessica was speaking about earlier. So it gets us to the zero disease, it gets us to zero poverty, and it gets us to zero pollution, all surrounded by that zero inequality that really hits home and hammers in why impact investing is so important and really is the mission behind Stat Zero. But I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just want, that was.
Yeah, that's great.
I just want to make one comment that vernacular and language is so important, guys, in impact investing. And Rahm Emanuel said to me when I was at the White House, he said, go learn these different industries, right? Go learn nonprofits, go learn corporates, go learn governments. And they're speaking the same language, but they're not speaking the same language, right? So because we all come from different backgrounds, we're able to sort of locate that language and then move a person along. And to give you a powerful statement, like we were talking to the HHS director, and the HHS director had said to us, was like, we know that the public sector is limiting in its model, and we need to do something different, but we don't know what we don't know, right? And that is so powerful to then say, hey, like I need to understand limitations of my model, gain a new model, understand the world in a different way. And I think we've all had to do that as a result of the pandemic. But because we have so many different understandings of different industries with Johanna's technical skills, my and Jessica's accelerators, incubators, human-computer interaction, we're able to sort of locate things faster and easier, which helps us better help our clients.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And I want to ask one question that just, might be a little more technical, but I think to your point, semantics really matter. And obviously as a VC, you all are investing and taking equity positions in some of these organizations. But when you talk about pay for performance, it also resonates with the social impact bond movement, if you will, or SIBs. Do you see that as a component of this work or a complement to this work?
I definitely see it as a complement to the work. It's not necessarily an approach that we're taking, but to really be innovative in the space, you have to approach it through all different mechanisms, right? And so I do believe that you need the social impact bond space and that type of funding to exist. And you also need the institutional investors, and you need the impact investors, and you need the grants, right, to kind of all coexist and you need new forms of blended capital, actually, because I do think that if we're trying to make this huge change, because what the zero goals are for us are these big, hairy, audacious goals, right? And if we're really trying to achieve those at a global level, then you need all types of innovation to address it, including the social impact bonds, which was, really innovative at the time when it came out. And there are people that, really are benefiting from that. You need these institutional investors that are looking at, how do we incorporate impact, but not necessarily do impact investing like what we're doing? You need the grants, you need these different forms of blended capital, because what we're trying to do is change the entire kind of system. right? And to really change a system, you need to innovate and you need to disrupt it. And what that means is that you have to try things that maybe haven't existed before, and maybe you need to try them all at one time. So to answer your question, I do think it's a complement, and I do think that they are necessary in this space to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would say on the we have to create new offerings, like Jessica was saying, and the new offerings that must be created like have to come with what's in it for me, right? Because everyone's coin driven. And to give you an example, Microsoft now sells sells startups as a part of their sales team. This is public now, so I'm not sharing private information. What's interesting about that is in that co-sale model, now you can go as a venture capitalist and say, establish a partnership and say, hey, can you work with me to help drive my solutions through your startup, through your company, leveraging your channels. The issue though is most people don't know how to help that startup position in that market space. And the IBMs or the Microsofts or the Googles of the world, they don't necessarily have all the expertise to understand what that startup needs to get through that process to sustain, right? As a bridge or a broker. So, and that's why I said you need to barter the interest. So from our side, ultimately what we allow is we allow governments or we allow pension funds, high net worth individuals, and global family offices to invest in Stat Zero in our projects. And by doing that, we then shape the solutions. So, and we then map out the impact. We map out the investment we would like to achieve. So it then ties into local and global scalability, along with having global fiscal viability as far as the solution making traction and then gaining access to the right networks and global market access and services moving forward. So really the ecosystem that's necessary, which is what we also love about SVP and what they're doing as well.
Awesome. I'm kind of shifting gears a little bit and just thinking about the space and how you all became engaged and started the work that you're doing, particularly when you think about underrepresented populations in the finance, in the VC space. VC has this mystique about it, and are you a part of the right people or go to the right places at the right time? And you know, I think there's an element that needs to be broken up in that space, frankly, and it seems to be something that you all have made significant headway on. So I'd love your perspective from the perspective of underrepresented populations getting into VC and getting into this element of work. If you could shed some light on your experiences from that standpoint.
I'll answer this one, and I know because I know we're getting close to time, but you know, the space we know has, like you said, Charles, a huge issue with a representation, specifically for Black, Latinx, and women. And it's been that way for a long time. And I believe it's because of three issues, three barriers of entry, as you know, I call them. And that's, you know, just education, the knowing that the industry exists, what it does, and having those fundamentals. The second one is VC is really dependent on access to good deal flow, right? You are a good VC if you can get into certain deals, and to get into certain deals, you have to know who's raising. And so that's, you know, deal flow. And then the third one is access to network. The VC industry is a social capital game, and that's very dependent on education level, socioeconomic status, where you were born, so geographic region. And for a long time, that has benefited only a certain population, and mostly white men. And what we have wanted to do at Stat Zero, because as you can see, we are all either Black, Latinx, multiracial, and or women, and is really address that. So how do we create these spaces and opportunities, all the while trying to, you know, build a good business model and business structure for sustainability to address those inequities? What can we do? What's in our power? What's our responsibility? And what we did is we created this program actually that we beta launched last year, and it was called the Emerging Managers Program. And we addressed those three barriers of entry by creating this really intensive course. And you're actually seeing a lot of funds now implementing the same type of models that we did last year again, at the helm of the social movements where they were like, you have to do something about it. And now it's in your face and you can't get away from it. But we did this last year. And again, we provided the education, the tools, the network, and we had 24, what we called them fellows from across the United States, all Black, Latinx, and or women. And we took them through this really intensive training, gave them access to deal flow, had them, pitch live deals, do due diligence, and get that kind of on their resume so that they could go on to either becoming emerging fund managers or be in the VC space. And we're doing what we're doing now. Again, you're seeing that now happen across the industry with, you have Dorm Room Fund, you have, a bunch of other ones that are now doing it, including like Black VC, which is great. We need those. What we've done now is we've also capitalized certain fund managers through our Fund of Funds initiative. And that's, the third way that we invest. We invest in micro funds. And what we want to do is capitalize global fund managers. And we have, an exciting case with this Latinx Latina woman. She's amazing. She had an accelerator. She was ready for the next stage of the accelerator for Latinx entrepreneurs, and she needed the capital. And we've been working with her for the past 4 to 5 months on creating that fund thesis, really setting up her infrastructure and her processes to become a good fund manager, so that she can now go on and be that, be in the VC space and really have that power and that autonomy to make these decisions that we need. And, we're also going to be her anchor investment in that fund of funds, which is amazing. And I think the third thing we're doing is we have our impact investor crash course. And again, that gives you the fundamentals. So I think that's what we call, there's these two approaches. There's to creating systemic change. It's the bottom up, and that's how do you do this at an individual level? So what can you do? And you're seeing the rise of a lot of micro communities, and a lot of individual funds try to do that. Then you have these top-down solutions, right? Which is what policies are changing, what is being done in terms of the flow of capital. And that's where you need the LPs to actually commit capital so that the decision makers are these populations. And I think we're trying to address both of those through what we're doing. And we're hoping that people in the industry are taking note and can model it as we kind of test this out.
Yeah.
Johanna, do you want to talk about Pledge LA real quick?
We've got about a minute left. So I think we can note that we worked with Pledge LA. We hired 2 wonderful interns through them. We've actually brought on one of the interns as a full-time staff member. They were pretty instrumental in bringing it more to light, underrepresented eventual emerging managers in that space. And we'll be happy to talk more about it on Jessica's and my podcast that we have that's called Leading to Zero, where we talk about what it's like to be a woman and what it's like to be a woman in VC and starting up a business. And I know that's one question we wanted to get to that we probably won't have the chance to really talk about, but real briefly, it's really, really important for us to have a voice and to provide a voice for not only Jessica and I as we help co-found and lead and run the organization, but also for other female entrepreneurs, other female leaders in this space to also have that voice. And so Marquise, we'll talk about Pledge LA, and we'll make sure that the bigBANG team has our Leading to Zero podcast where Jessica and I can talk about what it's like to be brave and be bold and be a woman. And be a woman entrepreneur and lead the charge together as co-founders along with Marquise into this space. So my point of advice to anybody looking to do it is be brave, be bold, have a conversation, and just step out into the world to do it. So that's really what we'd like to see happen at Stat Zero.
Awesome. Well, we are running out of time, and so I really appreciate everyone tuning in, but I also just want to say thanks Stat Zero, not only for being here today, but the work you're doing, and I think even the renewed emphasis that it's placed in the context of today's society. And I wish you all the best as you all continue this. And I look forward to SVP partners and bigBANG participants tuning into your podcast and checking out more about your work. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
And thanks to SVP too.
Total assets invested for impact have tripled in the last 2 years. That's an incredible and encouraging figure. And I'm glad to say that within that, we can clearly see the impact investing ecosystem continuing to develop in North Texas. And so for the last 2 phenomenal sessions that we heard, thank you to Jennifer Kenning and Align Impact for joining us to share strategies for using capital as a tool for impact. and to Jessica, Marquise, and Joanna from StatZero for sharing more about the incredible vision they're working on. In particular, thanks to Charles Glover for moderating that great conversation. If you're watching these